Okay, so just to let everybody know, we are recording. So thank you everyone for joining. Hannah, do you want to do a bit of an intro and then I'll introduce our guests?
Sure. So this is a series of workshops Gina and I have put together from our separate businesses for B Corp month. So we're going through the different areas of the B Corp certification impact assessment. And we're just bringing in some people who've got some really interesting businesses and ideas and viewpoints on what that means to them as business owners and in the wider context of the industry. So today we're talking about the environment, and I'll let all our panelists introduce themselves and let us know why they feel that they want to contribute to this call. Gina and I both are B Leaders, which means we help businesses through the B Corp certification. And for those of you that for some reason don't know anything about the B Corp certification and are on the call, it's a framework and a process all businesses in all sectors and industries can do to measure their impact and their sustainability metrics. So if you want to talk further about that, you can talk about that with myself and Gina after the call. My business is Betternotstop. We help all sorts of businesses create sustainability metrics within their company. So sometimes that is the B Corp certification process. Sometimes it's looking at the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and we use all sorts of different sustainability metrics for businesses to grow their impact and their income. And I also run the Better Business Network, which is enrolling up until the 15th of April, which is for business owners that want some help with their accountability and to grow their network. So if you want to hear about any of that post-meeting, feel free to get in touch. My role today is to be keeping an eye on the chat, helping answer any questions that you may have either privately or that you want me to ask the panel discussion, and I'll also be taking notes. So if you want to send me your email privately, I can send you over the notes and a recording of the session afterwards. Also, if you weren't here in the first minute of the call, I have a very whiny sausage dog on the sofa behind me. So if you do hear whining throughout the call, I do apologise. I'm going to be putting myself on mute for most of it though, so hopefully you won't be distracted by that. But thanks for your time today. We're going to be on till exactly 12 o'clock. Gina and I might stick around for 20 minutes afterwards for extra questions, but we are very conscious of everybody's time. So if you do need to drop off earlier, feel free, we won't be offended. Okay, thank you so much. Cheers.
Thanks, Hannah. Well, thank you everyone for joining. My name's Gina Mula. I'm one of the founders of MulaShaker, and we are a creative agency that builds mainly brand experiences across retail, and our mission is to help brands activate change through purposeful design. I've worked with brands for almost 25 years, designing and building retail spaces. I co-founded a retail design agency that was based in the UK and Europe, and have worked with many global brands. And last year, MulaShaker was created to really take those learnings and work with brands and retailers in a much more sustainable way. So today I'm delighted we've got three, I think, big guests this week. Every week has been big, but this week we've got a really big subject to cover. So I'm delighted to welcome Joanna Czutkowna. Hopefully I've said that right this time. Joanna's a fashion futurist, ex-H&M, other stories. Her mission is to reinvent how the fashion industry and its leadership works with its supply chain to deliver an inclusive and sustainable future for us all. We have Paul de Zylva, who's Senior Nature Campaigner from Friends of the Earth. Apart from the Friends of the Earth, Paul leads the work on nature and combines this with charging. For example, National City Park Foundation is a founding member of the London Sustainable Development Commission. And we have Russ Avery, who describes himself as an eco-entrepreneur, specialist marketeer for sustainable brands. And his mission is to do whatever he can to achieve the UN Sustainable Development Goals to tackle the climate crisis. So thanks everyone for joining. And this week, as part of B Corp month, we asked the question, what does it mean to be a better steward to the planet? And three very different people from different parts of the kind of circle surrounding sustainability and environment And Paul, I'd like to start with you, if that's okay. Can you tell us a little bit about you, about Friends of the Earth, and why this is such an important subject at the moment?
Well, I'll try. I mean, Friends of the Earth is a kind of does what it says on the tin kind of organisation. We are friends of the Earth, and we're friends of the people on the Earth. And Friends of the Earth was formed 50 years ago this year, actually, because people then, I wasn't around then, but well, I was around, but I wasn't involved. I've been involved for quite a long time, actually, one way or another. But people saw the planet in peril and saw the impacts. They could connect the impacts that they saw globally with the condition or the deteriorating condition of their area. So Friends of the Earth is an organisation that tries to empower people to be active, to improve the quality of their lives, but do it in a way that's in step with what needs to make life possible for other people and for other creatures that we share the planet with. And you know, have we succeeded? Well, arguably we haven't, but our metrics are pretty complicated. You know, we're dealing with very complicated issues which are not separate. People love to separate these issues. So there's climate change over there, and there's waste over here, and there's energy over there, and there's nature and your whales or whatever. They're kind of all linked in a way. And I guess when we get into it, you know, there are ways of looking at an operation, an institution, or a business through lenses such as the Sustainable Development Goals, which I'm really glad to hear has been mentioned already, because that's kind of, you know, they're absolutely the right thing. But I think it's then how do you draw that back into your organization and work out what to do about it. But things have come a long way in a very, it has taken time. It takes time for these things to change. So, you know, some of these environmental campaigns are very, they might seem as though they're just dealing with a part of the problem, and in a way they are, but they're through a particular issue, you can see the bigger problem. You can see how acting on one thing helps deal with something else. So, but it's important because we're at a real, all the science basically says we're running out of time to act and to get things right, you know. And I've written some blogs which I'll gladly stick in the chat that you can read at your leisure, which summarize some of those things. But is it doable? Yes, it absolutely is. But it isn't doable if we carry on doing things in the same way, if businesses continue to operate in the way they do, and if our politicians make big pronouncements and then fail to follow through. Is that enough?
Yeah, I mean, such a huge subject, isn't it? We could be here all week. One of the things I read, Paul, that the Friends of the Earth called upon the government to step up to avoid catastrophic nature decline following the UN biodiversity report in 2019. And we are seeing some changes. New Zealand, for example, changed their indexing from GDP, gross domestic product, which measures growth, to people, profit, and planet. And we've seen that big changes can be made, but it's not just big changes, is it? It's also the small things that we can make huge changes.
It is, because the small things add up, or the small things are a microcosm of why the big change happens. You know, that it's ironical in a way, because we try and empower people to realize what those changes are, but the changes can feel small. So we have to show how what's the pathway? Why are you doing this? And it is about habit forming as well. We do this because it's a value, but we also understand why it matters in, you know, ecological terms or energy terms, or just better governance, you know. And so I think one of the challenges for organizations like Friends of the Earth and others is to always show the relevance of the action, and remind ourselves of why we're doing that. But yeah, I think quite a lot of stuff is changing, you know, having knocked on the door over many years myself, and people on whose shoulders I've stood, and thinking, you know, it's never getting any better. I think there's huge room for optimism. It doesn't mean I'm being a Pollyanna character, kind of thinking everything's nice and rosy and everything's great and I can go away and put my feet up, much as I'd like to. There's still so much which needs to be done, but I can see the things I was calling for 10 or even 20 years ago are happening now. So the question is, how do we scale up? How do we really, to use the awful football analogy, if I scored 1 goal, what's stopping me from scoring 3? Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think, one thing that's connecting us all here today is, apart from, creating businesses that balance profit with purpose, is the whole connection to B Corps, where as a B Corp, you are legally obliged to balance profit with purpose. And there's this real shift change to consider the planet in all of the business decisions that you make. Russ, I'm gonna come to you. Thank you, Paul. So an eco entrepreneur, I know you get involved in lots of incentives around pushing the sustainability message as a marketeer to lots of brands and businesses. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and why you have got into this space now?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for having me today. So I've worked in sustainability for 11 years now, 9 of those as a marketer. And 3 years ago, I left my job in London as the marketing director for a sustainability consultancy to go it alone as an independent marketer for sustainable businesses. And why am I in this sector at all? It honestly just goes back to to my childhood. I was born and brought up on the west coast of Scotland, surrounded by beautiful nature. I know it's a massive cliche, but it's true. I grew up watching David Attenborough documentaries on a Sunday evening with my family, and I've just loved nature and wildlife since as long as I can remember. And I left university with a degree in languages, and I had no intention of using them directly, like as a teacher or an interpreter or anything. So I was kind of lost for a couple of years after graduating, and then I decided that I should really try and get a career in something that I was passionate about. So I managed to get my foot in the door with a small ocean conservation charity called SeaWeb back in 2010, and the rest is kind of history, as they say. I really found my ikigai. I kind of fell into marketing by mistake while I was working there, and I'm now incredibly passionate about the role that business has in solving the climate crisis, because it's a crisis formed by big business, and big businesses can absolutely be at the heart of the solution, and all businesses, indeed small businesses as well. And more specifically, if I go nicher than that, I'm really passionate about the role that marketers can play in helping to drive the sustainability agenda, not only in the businesses that they work for, but because marketing and communications is essential if we want initiatives like the Sustainable Development Goals, etc., to be adopted by the masses. Marketers need to be working with engineers, scientists who do amazing work, but and who are incredibly intelligent people, but they're not necessarily the best communicators at telling a story. So we all need to come together, and I think marketers can really help to bring these different stories to life. One of which is, as Paul was saying, I'm a great believer in the fact that everything is connected. I'm a huge fan of various different initiatives like rewilding projects and things like that. So I don't know if anyone has seen the video. There's a good chance you have, because it's had like 40 million views, but there's a video on YouTube called How Wolves Change Rivers. And it's about trophic cascades in Yellowstone National Park. I've got some thumbs up there. That's awesome. That's a video that I send it to lots of different people, because it's a fantastic example of communicating something that's quite scientific, trophic cascades. Most of us haven't really heard of that unless we studied it at university or something. But it brings it to life in a way that just shows how connected nature is, and how actually it knows what it's doing. It's absolutely fine. It's us humans who are the problem, and who have forgotten that we are a part of nature. But if nature is just left alone for a little bit of time, because actually, as the Yellowstone wolves example shows, it doesn't actually take that long for regeneration to happen in a lot of places as well. It's just phenomenal. And I'm aware I have gone off on a bit of a tangent here, but I hope that kind of begins to answer your question and tells you why I'm so passionate about sustainability and the role that businesses can play.
Yeah, no, I love it. And your passion absolutely comes across. And I think, you know, for passion to come through in what you do in your daily life, you know, running a business or working for somebody, then as Paul says, you know, I think this is where we're seeing change happen, because we are putting our passions into action. And we know, working with brands, you know, that link to consumers is all around that emotional attachment, and brands have seen how they can build those communities through that emotional attachment, and it's the big subjects that really matter. And so, Joe, I'm going to come to you, because fashion is seen as as one of the key issues around climate change and societal as well as environmental issues. And we've had hours of conversations already around supplier chains and the fashion industry in general, and why it's slow to change. Again, another massive subject, probably a separate webinar in itself. But you've worked in that sector for many years, and I'm sure you've seen some horrors, but hopefully you've seen some positives as well. Can you tell us a little bit about that and a little bit about your background?
Yeah, sure. So I've been in the industry about 17 years now. I started off as a buyer, and then I moved to Shanghai. So I was in China for 10 years, working directly with suppliers, sourcing fabric, sourcing the supply base for a wide number of high street companies. I've traveled to most production markets, so Bangladesh, India, Indonesia, and I've really seen what it's like in terms of the supply chain globally. And like you say, there are difficult things that you see, but there's also a lot of positives. And I think COVID has brought a real time of change to these businesses, where they've had to change with supply chains being disrupted. And I see, you know, a lot of positivity in terms of the adoption of digital, which we've talked a lot about, and how almost being forced to change has brought, you know, has had impact on these environmental issues. You know, in terms of, for example, when we adopted 3D prototyping, we can save 70% of our pre-consumer samples. We're saving like 97% of the CO2 that we would have normally produced in the original way by making physical samples.
So sorry, I slightly lost you a little bit. Can you just repeat that end bit?
Sorry, I was just saying, for me, I think COVID has been a great catalyst, because it's forced businesses to change. So where we've talked before about the supply chain being very reluctant to change, you know, it's been forced upon them because of the disruption. So about 97% of CO2 can be saved by adopting digital prototyping. And we've seen an explosion of this since COVID has started. We can save around 70% of physical sampling. So, you know, in terms of where we're looking at waste, we're looking at how can we almost use waste as a resource? How can we reduce waste in the supply chain? For me, those are the good things that I'm seeing at the moment.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Sorry about that. We just lost you for a minute there. So we know that with fashion, I read somewhere that since 2012, there's been a 10% increase in the amount of clothing that's purchased in the UK alone. And by 2030, it's predicted that the industry's water consumption will actually grow by 50%. So when we read these figures around the increases in consumption, and yet, as Paul said, you know, there are some really positive things happening. How do we create this balance, Paul? I'm going to kind of come back to you if that's okay. I mean, the idea is that we don't just reduce the change, but we have to put it into negativity. How do we even begin to do that when consumption is still increasing?
Well, I wish I had a simple answer. There are no simple solutions to some of this. So I think there's an interesting debate. So just in the fashion world, you know, I think Joanna's right. Although I think I went to my first ever sustainable fashion show about 25 years ago, and a very well-known advertiser called John Hegarty basically was the kind of keynote speaker, and poo-pooed it all, because he basically said, you know, you can't stop this, it's run away, and only by creating profits can we solve the problems. And I foolishly stood up and I said, so why don't we save loads of money and avoid some of the problems in the first place, rather than causing a problem in order to pay for the cleanup? And it completely baffled him. But anyway, whatever. I think increasingly people get that. A lot of it's down to design. So as Joanna's talked about, design is your friend. You can be really clever and design out problems. Everything has been designed, you know. So the plastic bottles we throw away, why are they complex to recycle? Because they're made out of at least 4 different pieces of different plastic, which all have to be treated separately. That's a design challenge. So can we redesign that bottle, or maybe use it, you know, people looking at new materials. There's all sorts of ways of doing this. Your question also touched on the broader thing about the trend to just consume stuff. And there are a whole bunch of issues that come to play in that, which are really tricky to deal with. I'm not going to advocate there's a kind of no one could consume anything type argument, kind of no growth argument. That's a debate in itself, isn't it? But I think there are definite ways of reducing impact through looking at the start of your supply chain as opposed to the end, you know, because we tend to use what we call a tailpipe approach. We only deal with the problem once it's been caused, as opposed to designing out the problem. So that's crucial. I think also businesses are increasingly under scrutiny from not just from governments, but from their customers. They have increasingly customers are having to are putting their loyalty where companies are showing that they're doing stuff, and it's more than just superficial. So, and the whole disclosure issue, you know, so the fact that companies having to disclose increasingly their role in climate or energy or pollution, I think is a big driver for change, and being held responsible for those things. So these are not solutions in themselves, they're steps, and you have to look at the different ways they work. But I would love to see advertising change. I would love to see the adverts that actually give high profile to sustainable lifestyles. There are far too many cars being advertised where people are driving as though there's no other car on the road, because they're all going incredibly fast. So where's the Advertising Standards Authority on that? You know, next time you watch TV and you see a car advert, see how fast the car is going and see how few cars there are on the road. That's a classic entrenchment of a bad behavior being made normal. Yeah, but you could apply it elsewhere.
Yeah, that's really really interesting. And there's been some interesting stories recently. Oatly, for example, who sold 10% of their shares to a Blackstone investment company predominantly known for investing in fossil fuels, and their view was, well, you know, we need to help those companies change by allowing them to invest in companies like us. Russ, you know, in terms of work as a marketeer, you know, it's really important for brands to be transparent and authentic and open when they're trying to make, you know, huge changes, and bringing companies on board with that change takes guts. How do you feel, as, you know, as a sustainable marketeer? Do you think Oatly did the right thing? Do you think more companies should be doing that to really push that change forwards?
I don't know if they did the right thing by getting their 10% of investment from Blackstone, but I think they did the right thing in the way they communicated it. Yeah. So I appreciate the authenticity and the transparency in any brand comms, whether it's good or bad. I think the clever ones realize that actually their target audience and their customers will appreciate them for the honesty. It's like something that we get a lot is typically smaller to medium-sized brands asking us a question about their sustainability journey. and they're often worried that they're not very far along on it at the moment because they're comparing themselves to others who have been doing it for 20 years. And the answer is usually the same, which is that just be honest about where you are now and what you're and that you're on your journey. So acknowledge that you're on your journey and that there is no destination, because there's no such thing as a perfectly sustainable business or whatever. And tell your audience in obviously great creative ways and however you can do it, but tell them the honest story about what you're doing to be a sustainable business and what your intentions are, what you want to be doing in the future. Tell them what you're not doing yet, etc. And people will appreciate you for it. We can see that direct tie-in to honest and transparent marketing and advertising with sales and with customer loyalty and things like that. So it really does make a difference. I also just wanted to say, because we've talked about fashion from Joanna, and then Paul was talking about advertising and marketing, it's just such a good segue to give a quick example on messaging and communications, because sustainable fashion is something very close to my heart as well. That's only really been in the last 2 years since I've got to know anything about it at all. And people will say, why does this sustainable t-shirt cost £22? And that's a form of marketing, right? Because it's out there in the world, and it might be a magazine asking it or whatever. But of course, the question should be completely flipped. It should be, why does this t-shirt cost £2? £2, sorry, not £22, So we need to change the narrative in lots of different sectors to make it fit a way that we can communicate sustainability much more effectively. And absolutely, the question should be, why does this t-shirt cost £2? Because if you don't know about sustainable fashion and that's the norm to you from where you buy your clothes, and also don't get me wrong, some people, I think, I'd be interested to know what you think about this, Joanna, but I think unfortunately, a lot of things that are sustainable, it is still a luxury and a bit of a privilege in terms of cost, unfortunately. So some people, the last thing on their mind is thinking about buying a sustainable t-shirt, right? They're just trying to put food on the table and pay their energy bills. But for those of us that can afford to look elsewhere, we should be asking ourselves why this t-shirt costs £2, because you cannot sell a t-shirt for £2 without destroying the planet and exploiting people. That is a fact. So a sustainable t-shirt might cost £22, but that's probably because of the way that they've manufactured and grown the cotton and the fair wages that they're paying to the factory workers. And maybe they've shipped it to the UK instead of air freighted it, and lots of different things like that. So yeah, it's just a really interesting kind of tie into fashion and communications and advertising. And also, just very quickly, luckily, I think consumers, with every year that passes, there seems to be an ever increasing number of kind of conscious consumers, which also means that we're getting better at spotting greenwash, which is good, because companies need to be called out for greenwash whenever we see it. And I think the average person on the street now is maybe becoming a little bit more clued up with every passing year, and is therefore becoming better at spotting greenwash. And Paul mentioned the Advertising Standards Authority earlier. Last year, there was a campaign by Shell, which made my blood boil. And it was the Shell Go Plus campaign, which was a new type of fuel that they were selling. Well, obviously it was the same fuel, but it was Shell Go Plus. And if you used Shell Go Plus, which obviously cost you more, you were driving carbon neutral. I shit you not, this is the actual phrase that they used, because obviously what they were doing with that extra money was planting a few trees, supposedly, but it got complained about so much that it was only around for a month or so before the ASA removed it. So some good things are happening in terms of what we're recognizing and stuff, and I don't think brands can get away with the level of greenwash that they were once able to. So we've got to take some positives.
Yeah, I agree. There's a lot of tree planting going on at the moment, and I think, to your point and to Paul's point, we should be looking at this from a circular perspective. We should be, rather than try and replace what we're already using, and for a fossil fuel creator to create a carbon neutral fuel is quite shocking and frightening, actually, to think that they could even get away with that. But Joe, Russ made some really interesting points there about the fashion industry. Have you got some comments on that?
I mean, I agree with what you say, Gina. I think we need to talk more about circularity. I think when we talk about sustainable fashion, the word sustainable in some ways has become meaningless. You know, Stella McCartney recently said, you know, I don't know what that means anymore. And I think what we need to do is change the fashion system. You know, it's not that we have sustainable fashion over here and fast fashion over here. We have to change the entire system. And it's looking, like you said, into that supply chain. I don't think you can separate environmental from social sustainability. You know, if you take fast fashion away, how do you support the workers in those developing countries? So I think it's complex, but I think what we have to do is take a holistic approach in how we look at this. You know, I think it's 1 in 7 people in the world are employed by the textile industry. So it's massive, but it's how do we do it in better ways? So it's looking at things like digital that I talked about before, but also looking at resale models, rental models. We've got enough clothing there for the next 6 generations. So how do we utilize that? How do we rethink waste? So there's some great things happening in terms of like pineapple leather. So waste products are now being used for materials. We can now grow leather in labs. How do we look at all these waste products in a different way? You know, I think UGG is an interesting example. They've just launched a sandal where they've used renewable sugarcane, which actually takes carbon from the atmosphere. And we just, like Paul said, have to spend more time on the design phase. I think companies have become in danger of constantly producing without, you know, spending that time and looking what's the full life cycle of this product, you know. Also, how is the customer going to dispose of it? I think we have sadly got into a model of just providing the customer with more and more, and I think we have to change that. You know, there's so many issues within the fashion industry. I do agree, Russ, but I think it's very complex, and it really involves looking at it from many different angles to make true change. Because I think if you just kind of change it to sustainable fashion, then the majority of people, like you say, Russ, who can't afford that, where do they go? So it's really systems change that I think will move us forward.
The thing about price is really interesting, though, isn't it? Because I've done some work with looking at cotton, which is incredibly wasteful. You know, it takes a lot of nutrients out of the soil gets depleted, the crop becomes prone to pests, massive amounts of pesticides, lots of worker harm through pesticides and processing, and then there's dyeing and what have you. Dyeing as in colour. People die from pollution and dyeing, but anyway, there is, you know, people talk about early adopters and things like that. You know, I think I see some trends. You'll probably know about this more, Jana, but it's taken a while. That if you talk about price, some of the companies, you know, if Levi's made all their jeans organic, the price would come down overnight. Although they probably put a design premium on it because it's Levi's, yeah. But you see what I mean? There's a lot more organic cotton out there than people imagine, but it's dissipated. But you need a big market mover who would say, we're going to back this because it's the right thing to do, and we can probably help people, we can sustain livelihoods, we probably clear up their health problems as well. And bing, you start getting some of the dividends from that. And then you get brand loyalty and what have you. So I guess on a number of fronts, we're looking for some of the bigger players to start dabbling with this and to start doing it because that's what they do.
And I would say that's definitely happening. I think H&M is actually a great example for that. With organic cotton, there's actually a massive shortage of it at the moment. There's been issues in terms of the organic certification. So there's been a huge amount that's been taken out of the market, but there's only so much quantity that can be grown. So a lot of organic cotton's actually been bought up by those big companies at the moment. And you are totally right in terms of cotton being a very water thirsty crop. But the good thing about it is at the end of its life, it can biodegrade if it's not blended. You could produce a much more efficient fabric with polyester, but then you're left with this legacy that can't biodegrade. So for me, it's looking at the full life cycle of that product. You know, how often is it going to be washed? Is it going to shed microfibers? And I think once we kind of look end to end and, you know, almost ask brands where their responsibility stops. You know, as a brand, we stop our responsibility once we've sold it to the customer. Is that the right thing to do? Should there almost be an extended responsibility policy with incentives backed by the government for doing that? And I think if you did that, brands would really start to think differently about how they designed. You know, if you have to take care of your waste at the end of it, you start to think in a different way. And for me, that's why it becomes a bit tricky, because from a brand's point of view, you know, when you stop your responsibility at that point, you make different decisions. You know, you're much more likely to go with the cheap polyester. You know, that is going to cause a lot of environmental issues further down the line, than invest in organic cotton. But, you know, I talked about H&M because they do, you know, you can read their sustainability policy. There are investments into new textiles. And I think that's the issue at the moment. When people ask me, well, what sustainable fabric should I use? You know, it almost doesn't exist yet. You know, there needs to be so much more investment into closing the loop, using the materials we already have and making them into new ones, whether that's through better recycling, better processing. But that's where the innovation needs to happen for me, not looking at how we can make what we've got better, because we've had a long time to do that already. It's really, okay, how can we change the system? You know, I've talked to Gina a lot about this, but in terms of, you know, 5 years time, we might be all wearing digital clothes on this Zoom. We might not need the same amount of physical clothes, because we could almost just get a digital image rendered onto our moving body, because we have a strong digital self now, you know, having moved to home working through the pandemic. So I think it's really looking at those out of the box ideas at the moment that might seem a bit forward thinking, and thinking, okay, how are we going to put those into our business plans? Because that's where we're going to save, you know, save the majority of fabric use. You know, all those issues change completely when you really start to reinvent what the fashion industry actually is.
That's a good point, Joe. And I don't, Russ, did I see you pop up sheep included there in a chat?
Yeah, so I never heard of them until a couple of weeks ago, and then I heard them in a Clubhouse interview, and they're, well, you know, they say that they're carbon negative, right? So they're definitely worth checking out for anyone who's interested. I think it was Alexandra who asked. So yeah.
Yeah, there's some great brands out there, and they're one brand, Hyatt Denim, McNair Shirts, Nudie Jeans, who all have committed to repairing your product for life. So you buy it once and you have it for life. And it's these smaller kind of disruptor brands that are really making these changes and real commitment to change. We were on a webinar last week, and Elliott Wood, who are huge structural engineers who are based in London, are about to launch a sustainability tool, and that's a real call out to the building sector, and it's all around reusing building materials. Bill Gates mentioned recently, obviously in his book, about concrete was huge polluter when it comes to the effects of climate change. And Elliott Wood are creating this tool that, you know, their mission is to reuse building materials in the building sector. So, you know, I agree, Paul. I do think there are some real fantastic positive changes happening, and it'd be really great to just the next 15-20 minutes to just talk more about the positive things that are happening. And I think almost this conversation almost becomes too big for a lot of people to even just, you know, don't even know where to start. What are the small things that we can all do as individuals to make incremental changes, and what are the positive stories that are around currently? That's to you, Paul.
That's me, is it?
Well, it could be for everyone actually.
It's another big thing. I mean, change happens because you believe that you have some agency. Change happens because, you know, and actually we've all talked, haven't we? And people on the call, like, you can all think about how you felt you had some control over something and therefore you made a change. It's also, I agree with Russ, don't beat yourself up because you're not suddenly a 5-star sustainability business. Be honest if you're a 2-star, but be clear where you want to get to and what help you need. And there's lots of help out there. There's no shortage of help. I got involved in this racket when there was nothing. As I said, we have to remember the progress that has been made. I do feel as though I'm fighting the same battles, but I keep telling myself, and I'm telling colleagues who are newer to this, yeah, but I absolutely where I wanted to be. I would love, my job is to be impatient. I want us to be 10 years ahead of where we are now. Yeah. So I remember campaigning on the streets of South London, calling for cars to have catalytic converters fitted as standard. Yeah. Or for you to have energy labels on your fridge so you knew how much energy it was consuming. I was campaigning for that. That is standard now. Yeah. So you have to recognize the progress that is made and use that to say, look, that's how we can, learn from that. Or how does understand how change happens, I think is something. Connect that to your sense of agency and focus on one or two things, but see the bigger picture, see how it fits into the bigger picture. So I suppose what I'm saying is never underestimate your own ability to change things, but don't get too frustrated when you don't succeed. So that is born out of experience. It isn't just kind of one of those mantras. The change that's happened, and the reason I feel reasonably positive, although I'm not kind of in denial about the problems, is because I've seen what happens when things do get on a roll. Yeah. And that's why I do think some of the bigger players need to come in. I take Laura's point in the chat about some of the bigger companies. I need to see more of those traditional sectors and companies mainstreaming this and being honest, because I still see a lot of nonsense from those companies. I deal with the mining companies, I deal with the tobacco companies, I deal with the pharma. So a little more honesty and preparedness to admit would be great, but we can have a conversation about that. So I also think there are going to be companies that don't exist yet, and they may be on the call, who are going to take over. There are some companies or some activities are not going to be, they're not going to be in business in 5 or 10 years' time. I won't, if you want a private conversation, I'll tell you what my hit list is, but not because I'm taking them out of business, because their business model is not going to work. It's not going to be compliant with what we need to do on climate and nature, the ecological crisis. And I would add the people poverty development issue. Yeah, they are going to get found out, and they are already being found out. So, and that's why they very often put into the mix the kind of shell advert that Russ, because they've got to be seen to be doing something. I would far rather have a sensible conversation. And my last point is, just to illustrate this, I get a lot of companies come to me and say, what can we do about, we're really worried, we really like to do. And I said, well, as long as you're honest and open, great. And they said, yeah, but what do we do about offsetting? I said, I'd rather, offsetting doesn't work. Just be really clear about the bits of your company that are on track and the bits that you can't do anything about right now, but you'd like to. But don't pretend that offsetting is where you pretend that you've paid some money for someone else to clear up your mess, essentially. It's like, let's be honest, because actually there's a bit of a racket there. And I think a lot of companies are trying to pretend that, don't worry, we've offset our air miles, or don't worry, we've planted loads of trees somewhere. There's lots of really bad tree planting. There just is. This is the danger of pulling the wrong lever. So really work on, it goes back to design, really work on the quality of what you're designing, and get the help is out there, and Friends of the Earth will help you to not make the mistakes as well. And if you're doing good, we'll give you a pat on the back. If you're trying to pull the wool over people's eyes, you will find out that as well. Sorry, I was finger pointing. I didn't mean to finger point.
I think you were pointing at Hannah. we need to really foster green entrepreneurship, because we can prove time and time again now that being a sustainable business and being a profitable business are not mutually exclusive. They can absolutely go hand in hand, and actually you can be more profitable by operating more sustainably. So there is a massive opportunity for anyone out there who is thinking of starting their own business and who's got that entrepreneurial spirit to create a business that is not only a great business for them and everything they want to achieve from a financial standpoint, but which helps to solve some of the world's biggest challenges that we're now facing. So I'd love to see, you know, like the government and people doing more to encourage that. To Laura's comment in the chat, I hosted a chat about this on Friday night in Clubhouse for an hour, and it was super interesting. So basically, yeah, there is no way that British American Tobacco and Glencore, you know, have really good ESG ratings without spin, basically, and the way that you can get around it. It's unbelievable. So, you know, they're often the mining company are often known as like one of the world's worst companies for the environmental damage that they cause. So we had a huge chat about sustainable business accreditations and certifications, including B Corps, obviously, and what they actually mean, like getting under the skin of them. Are some of these ESG ratings, etc., robust and stringent enough? The answer, of course, is that a lot of the time, no, they're not, because otherwise those 5 companies could never be on a list of top 5. So it is a minefield out there, definitely, but there are obviously lots of people who can help in lots of different areas. You've got Friends of the Earth who can advise on all the things that Paul's just talked about. You've got consultants like you, Gina and Hannah, who are advising businesses through B Corp certification and things like that. So the help's out there for people to look to, and we just need to keep fighting the good fight, because time is most definitely not on our side.
I think the thing that, again, is I'm loving at the moment is we're all coming together, the collaboration. I can see Julian's from construction industry, and you know, we're all from different sectors, and we're all having the same conversations, and we're all aligning on making the world a better place, you know, whilst earning a living, and what's enough is enough. And I think all of our knowledge and experience and learnings and pulling all of that together, I think, is making huge changes within communities. And you know, I can see it in our village. You know, we've got orchards in public spaces getting planted. And Russ, I know you got involved in you know, community rewilding projects. And Paul, we've met through Elizabeth Marsh and the Green Ribbon Project, which has brought over 100 people from every sector you could possibly think of, because there is a drive to make a change in the world. And we know the pandemic started because of an environmental issue, which has now created a societal issue, which we're going to be living through, I'm sure, for the next few years or forever.
The thing about that is that one thing I've noticed, you know, so I've advised every mayor of London on sustainable development, and that I've been in a room with people who aren't the same as me, you know. So I've been in there with physicians, people from construction, people from, you know, different sectors, but we all came together because we saw our role in the piece of the pie, if you like. We all formed a slice of the pizza or whatever, and the point was that the solutions are not going to be solved because I, as a campaigner or a policy person, you know, they're not going to be solved just because I persuade people. They're going to be solved because the engineers or the surveyors or the designers or the local politicians or the people who can persuade people locally, they come together. And I think this is what's happening. People are trying to work out what the shift is and what their role is, but they're doing it because other people are enablers around that. It's not going to be solved because Elon Musk makes our future. Frankly, I'm not sure I want to live on Mars, whatever. But the point is that it's not down to him. It's down to a whole bunch of people who know what the solutions are. But yeah, there are some political blockages about that, and there are some institutional blockages. There was a survey about 5 or so years ago, which went to the World Economic Forum, which is very interesting, about how the majority of FTSE 250 companies, the chief execs, all really knew that this whole ecological agenda was absolutely going to kill them unless they acted. but they understood the disparity between what they thought and the realities of just doing business on a normal day. So the things they were showing, the amount of time they were featured in the news, or the company was, and the things they said was a massive gap between what they actually thought. So how to close that gap between thought and action, I think, is a challenge for businesses now, because you've got to start stepping up. Not you. I mean, who are the leaders? Who are the people who are going to mainstream this and are going to create the toe for others to kind of say, yeah, I can do that. So that's why I'm positive, because I see things moving, and because people from different backgrounds and professions are coming together to solve things, which tends not to be the way in the past. So we're de-siloing, smash those silos.
Yeah, it's great.
Cool.
And lots of change.
I was wondering if I could just ask Paul a quick question. When you've been doing this for years now, and when you said, you know, you always want to be 10 years ahead, like, I absolutely get it, and your job is to be impatient and stuff. So I don't know if this is even comparable, but if you compare 25 years ago campaigning about energy certificates and the things you're doing now, and then how now they are, you know, things like that, a standard and catalytic converters and stuff, things that you're campaigning for now, and where we are in 2021, and we keep hearing about the Sustainable Development Goals and how we're nearly at tipping point, etc. I mean, even if in 10 years from now we're seeing some good stuff happening that we wish had happened now, but at least it's happened in a decade's time, I mean, is it going to be a much bleaker picture though, because of where we're at now with, you know, CO2 parts per million and everything else that the climate scientists are telling us? Like, I guess essentially in a roundabout way, I'm asking, like, if you think like we're too late, or if you think we can still turn things around.
Well, my first response is it's never too late. Although my second point is there will be a point where it's never too late. And so the science is very clear. If you want to keep global average temperatures within a safe margin, we need to turn down emissions considerably very quickly. And that's why this year, postponed from last year, is very crucial, both in terms of renegotiation of the climate, global Paris climate agreement, but also the biodiversity conference that's due to take place in China, and the renegotiation of the Sustainable Development Goals. The science is very clear that there comes a point where people talk about tipping points. We're not there yet, but there's a point at which, unless we turn things around, it will breach what's safe. And the other thing is, we also have to be realistic, is that a lot of the problems that have been caused because of existing emissions or historic emissions are in the atmosphere anyway. So bad stuff is still going to happen. So the fact that you see, I don't know, an iceberg break off, ice shelves become icebergs, is down to the historic stuff that we've not addressed quickly enough. So bad stuff will continue to happen. The question is, the scientists will be able to tell us whether we're on the right path. And that's in terms of climate, and it also applies to nature and biodiversity and ecosystems, repairing our ecosystems, the ability of soils to provide good food, or air to be clean for us to breathe, and soils to be fertile, fertile, because we've got really good data on all that stuff, and we know what levers we need to be pulling. So we can get on a path of repairing the damage pretty quickly, but it doesn't mean bad stuff won't happen. So putting my optimistic hat on, always, but being clear that doesn't mean bad stuff. People will still be saying, yeah, but if everything's going to be all right, why is this still happening, I suppose? And that's the conversation we need to be having in our sectors, in our our clusters, on our latest platforms, the one you're on.
So just going on from Russ's point, some really good stuff is happening. So you've got countries committing to net zero. But I'm going to lead with a question here, Paul. China has announced its intention to be carbon neutral by 2060. So that's China. You've got Japan, Hungary, Canada, South Africa, South Korea committed to similar goals by 2050. The UK was looking at a 61% reduction by 2030. It all seems a long way away still, and yet we're, you know, I think we're all aware that we need to make change now. Does that?
It's a pathway you get onto. So I don't have a problem with people setting long-term targets, but long-term target isn't, oh, we'll leave it 50 years and then we might hit the target. That's the danger. It's what's happened now. Yeah. So we're well off target in terms of hitting what was agreed at the Paris Climate Convention. And same on nature, restoring nature. World governments agreed 20 years ago to get on target to stop causing damage and to restore. And then we breached that target, and then we rolled it on to 2020. And that's been breached. So you do have to stop, you know, again, put my optimistic hat on. Governments rarely lead. My job is to try and get governments to do the right thing and to show that society wants stuff. The role of business is really important because business is very often thinking longer term than government and is prepared to innovate and take a bit of risk. Some businesses like to just keep milking the profits and pretend they're doing stuff. That's a separate conversation. But let's assume that people on the call are in the first category. They're the ones that government will take a lead from. The government will take a lead from whether people want stuff and whether businesses want to be part of supplying that need. And that's the magic, yeah? Meanwhile, leave the hard stuff to me, although I want your voice in persuading Boris to do better. And so the fact that it feels long-term doesn't mean, my question is, what's the pathway? Are you going to get on that pathway quickly? Because when you get on that pathway, the magic snowball. It's a snowball effect. And magic will happen as a result. The innovation will flow, the design solutions will flow, and then people will find their own solutions as well. So again, at the risk of being over-optimistic, I really do need to go and have a lie down. You know, this is what we can do. This is what it's about. And do you know what? To be positive, there are even some companies who are doing really bad stuff now. I talked about them not existing in future. They might even change too.
Yeah, that's the hope. That's the hope for us all, isn't it? Well, look, there is some really positive things happening. We know because of the pandemic, there's much more collaboration between lots of business owners. More brands than ever seem to be considering their impact. And there's definitely a change in the air, and there are more B Corps happening every day and more sustainability businesses popping up to help everybody with that change. I can still see questions popping up, but Hannah, is there any questions from the chat, or do you think they've been covered through the conversation?
I think a lot of it's been covered through the conversation. I think, you know, Paul's made a very important point there. It's about the businesses making the change so that the governments have to kind of react to that. And, you know, 100 years ago, it started grassroots when the trade union started in 1871. And then within 30 years, we had weekends. So it came from the grassroots, came up to the businesses, and then it went to the government level. So it's exactly what, you know, what's been talked about the whole session. It's about, we do have agency to make change individually, and then that collectively will make the big changes. So yeah, I haven't got any particular notes or questions in the chat that haven't already been answered. Just to follow on from the talks, I'm just putting a link in for there's a festival of action at the end of the month with this about the Sustainable Development Goals, which is a free event, which I think a lot of the people on this call would probably be interested in. And Russ also mentioned that he's on Clubhouse. So anyone that's got an iPhone and isn't already on Clubhouse and wants an invite, I've got some invites, but Russ is a moderator for a sustainability club on there. And there's tons of really interesting conversations, a lot around fashion and the circular economy, but also on all areas of the Sustainable Development Goals for anybody that's kind of wanting to kind of delve in and educate themselves a bit more on how those different frameworks can help them change their own behaviour in their business. So those are just some resources I wanted to share.
Thanks, Hannah. So I think we're going to end today, but well, let's all leave on a positive note. You know, we're all here, we're all having the conversation, we're all making small changes, we're all connecting. If there's anyone in particular wants to talk about what they're doing, that they haven't said already, please do. But I think the thing is, let's just keep making those small changes. Let's keep making that impact, and we can all make the world a better place for ourselves, for the business, for the planet, and for each other. Is there anything else you want to add to there, Hannah or Russ or Joe?
Just want to say thanks again for inviting me, and it's been a really great hour.
Thanks, Russ. Great to have you.